Hey, this is Tom Webster, and this is Sounds Profitable for Wednesday, June 26th, 2024. My favorite insight from Ad Nauseam. Just how many ads do podcast audiences expect in a given episode? The new study Ad Nauseam gives some insight. Spoiler, it's not zero. But first, it's almost time for the Podscape mid-year refresh. Every 6 months, Sounds Profitable and Magellan AI publish the Podscape, a top-down view of the podcasting industry with every company we can find represented in one supersized infographic, sorted by the work they do in the industry. If you'd like to submit your company from the business of podcasting to be included in the Podscape, click on the link in the show notes to fill out our handy-dandy form. Submissions are open until the end of the day, Friday, July 5th. In our recent study, Ad Nauseam, we surveyed over 1,000 weekly podcast listeners to find out their tolerance for ads in podcasts. We looked at how many ads are too many, how important variety is, the right frequency and position of ads, and more. Of all the individual findings, I appreciated stepping way back and taking a 100,000-foot view of what listeners think about podcast ads in context. By the way, why does global air travel not use meters for altitude? Score one for the Yanks. Let's take a look at just 3 data points and what they really say. The first data point, we asked, think about your favorite podcast that also has ads. How many total ads do you expect to hear in a typical episode of that podcast? Well, the average there was 2.9 ads, which let's just call it 3. Then in a more specific question, how many ads do you recall hearing in the last podcast episode you listened to that contained ads? And again, the average answer here was 3.1. And finally, we asked, in your opinion, were there too many, fewer than expected, or just the right number of ad breaks? 56% said just the right amount, 9% fewer than expected. About a quarter here, actually 28% total, 26% men and 30% women, let's be precise on this show, thought that there were too many ad breaks. But the majority, well over 50%, and actually over 60% in every demo, said it was either just right or less than they thought. Now, in succession, what these slides tell us is that most listeners expect to hear 3 ads, and most listeners report that this is in fact what they heard on their last podcast. And that last data point, most listeners think the number of ad breaks is just right. And of course, there's other data in the report that offers a similar conclusion. Most people think we're doing a good job with ads. Now imagine that. Ask a network TV viewer, and you will get dramatically different results. Heck, ask someone trying to actually read an article on the web that they click to from social media. And don't get me started on commercial radio. I mean, it's right there in the title. We have built a special snowflake with podcast advertising. Yes, we have a way to continue monetizing the space and building a sustainable career path for creators. But I hope you'll agree with me that the better path for doing that is not doubling the ads on the biggest shows, but making buying ads on the smallest shows a friction-free and lucrative experience. I think it's easy to talk about how far we can push things when you have a perception advantage like this, but I sure wouldn't. This is a remarkable advantage right now. Our audience tells us they expect to hear ads, that we are delivering what they expect, and that delivery is pretty tolerable. And this is why when I hear podcasters tell me my audience won't tolerate ads, I get the spirit of that. But having a few good, relevant, and well-targeted ads is a mainstream consumer expectation. Still, we have to keep our foot on the throttle, but we also need to maintain the integrity of our pod waves a little better. I write all of this because I was catching up on a couple of my favorite podcasts last night, and I heard 3 different things over 2 episodes that were kind of head-scratchers to me. 1, a beer ad reminding us that the NBA Finals are a long haul and you want plenty of beer on hand. Well, the NBA Finals ended a week before this episode dropped. Go Celtics. Another ad for a product not related at all to sports that had this line: you are busy supporting your local sports team. Now, I call this seasonal ad disorder, or SAD. And then something I hear too much. We'll be back after a break. And no break. We can quibble about any or all of these things, but I am persnickety about at least this topic. They're all tiny, and maybe there are diminishing returns to the kind of monitoring and review that would catch them all. Maybe I'm just being a jerk. But something, 1,000 paper cuts, something, I don't know. No media platform has any guarantee of security, including this one. By increasingly looking at the 10-foot view, however, we can protect the 100,000-foot view. Now, obviously, everything I've said just now is my own words. I hope that's evident. But I did ask my good friend Claude, that's Claude AI, what it thought about the ad nauseam study with a very simple prompt. What are the top recommendations you would give to the podcasting industry based on these data? Now, I'm not going to read this in Claude's voice, but assume this is Claude. Based on the findings of the ad nauseam study, here are the top recommendations for the podcasting industry. Number 1, maintain a balanced ad frequency. Most listeners find 2 or 3 ads per episode and 1 or 2 ad breaks tolerable. Aim to keep the number of ads and breaks within these ranges to avoid annoying or alienating listeners. Number 2, experiment with creative ad formats. With 57% of listeners indicating they would be more tolerant of ads if they were different from typical formats, podcasters should explore innovative ad types such as mini dramas or songs or interactive segments to engage listeners and reduce ad skipping. Number 3, minimize ad repetition within episodes. Over half the listeners find hearing the same ad multiple times in a single episode annoying. Work with advertisers to ensure a variety of ads are played within each episode to maintain listener attention and minimize frustration. Number 4, focus on ad relevance and entertainment value. Listeners are more likely to skip ads due to a lack of interest or relevance. Collaborate with advertisers to create entertaining, informative, and relevant ads to the podcast's audience to increase ad engagement. Number 5, leverage host-read ads. 23% of listeners found an ad memorable because it was read by the podcast host. Encourage hosts to deliver ad reads that align with their style and the podcast tone to create a more seamless and engaging listening experience. Number 6, optimize ad placement. Most listeners prefer ads to be played at the beginning, middle, or evenly spread throughout the episode. Experiment with ad placement to find the optimal balance for your podcast and audience. And number 7, capitalize on promo codes. With 34% of listeners having used a promo code from a podcast ad, offer exclusive discounts or bonuses to incentivize listeners to engage with ads and make purchases. Ensure that promo codes are easy to remember and accessible. By implementing these recommendations, the podcasting industry can enhance the listener experience while maintaining the effectiveness of podcast advertising. And Claude, I certainly would not write enhance the listener experience. Well, that's pretty good, Claude. Go treat yourself to a nice can of aftermarket synthetic motor oil. You can't focus on your family and local sports team if you're worried about protecting the life of your engine. Programming note, no podcast from me next week, our weekly podcast. This is the July 4th episode, as I will be celebrating throwing off the yoke of British tyranny, or I'll be on a cruise in the Med. Thanks for listening. This was my favorite insight from Ad Nauseam. This episode was hosted on Spreaker. I'm Tom Webster, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.